Okay, so we'll get going. Last lecture of this course. Yes, but we still have some more drama after the lunch. Hope all of you will enjoy that. Okay, so in this session, as listed in the schedule, um, I'm going to talk about climate change adaptation policies. How do we use modeling based evaluation frameworks to evaluate adaptation policies with respect to climate change impacts like urban flooding. But before I go to that, I wanted to finish the unfinished, slight small unfinished part of my first presentation on mitigation that I gave on the first day, uh, uh, where those 4 bundles that I was talking about, we also did the estimation of consumer surplus of those 4 bundles, basically to understand which mode users would gain economically, which mode users would lose economically in economic terms in those bundle scenarios. So, there are just couple of slides that I will finish before I move to the adaptation part. Also, my scheme of offer is still on. I have been giving these by 8 by 14 get 4 more lectures and so on. So, today utilizing the time, I would also cover another presentation. It is not part of the listed schedule, which would bring another dimension, which we have not seen so far in last 5 days, which is about gender issues in transport, women related issues in transport. Now, how do we use some of these statistical modeling techniques to get a better feel of gender issues in transport? Somebody may say this is all social science, what is there for scientists like us to do, but many times when I present these results in forums, they feel pleasantly surprised that, oh, a science institute is also trying to study these aspects. And what could be this? For example, one presentation that I will give would be on women safety in public buses, which has been an important topic and issue in last many years. And also, if I get time, I will touch more on the gender issues in cycling. Okay. So, let us see how we optimize the time. So, I will try to give some additional free schemes, along with this lecture. Okay. So, consumer surplus is nothing but difference between the consumer's willingness to pay in terms of travel cost, travel time, etc., and what they actually pay is called your consumer surplus. And it is basically this rule of 1/2. The idea is that if the price of travel changes from say Pij not Pij 1, the demand changes from Dij not to Dij 1, then the change in consumer surplus or the user benefits or cost due to change is equal to the area of this triangle ABC. Okay. If I look at mathematically, differently for private transport modes and public transport modes, this is how my consumer surplus equation looks like, where I am basically calculating the improvement in travel time and the improvement in travel cost between given OD pairs, okay, due to introduction of different scenarios between BAU and. So, here for example, you have the OD origin destination trips between I and J in the base scenario and the given scenario. Okay. Likewise, you have here actually the travel cost, and I factor it with the total OD demand between those pairs. Okay. So, this essentially helps me understand that in the situation of given scenario, what gains I get in actual travel cost as well as in travel time between OD pairs, and how do I translate it mode wise for different mode users between those OD pairs in terms of how much they have gained and how much they have lost. Okay. Likewise, for public transport, So, this is how the result would look like. So, yeah. Now, the bars that are going down and you see the negative sign are for car, two-wheeler and auto. In fact, in all the three bundles, bundle 4 does not have any additional impact as compared to bundle 3. Bundle 3 and bundle 4 have same impact. So, what I see from here is car, two-wheeler and auto rickshaw users in each of these bundles, and we are talking about the money saved or lost in INR, in Indian rupees. This is the amount of loss that these mode users have in terms of the economic class and the consumer surplus, and the bus and metro users, although the bar is quite small on the scale, but basically they have some gains. Likewise, in bundle 2 and bundle 3, you can at least see the bars coming up. Okay. So, in each of these scenarios, we are able to quantify how much of economic cost different mode users are gaining and who are losing. So, the bus and metro users are gaining and the car, two-wheeler and auto rickshaw users are losing. So, when I try to quantify this and put numbers, what we get is, for example, with bundle 3, consumers who are using public transportation gain about 0.7 million per day in 2030 and 1.1 million per day in 2050. While the two-wheeler users are at the major loss with 360 million per day in 2030 and 1220 millions per day in 2050. Okay. And this is primarily happening because of the modal shift that we are seeing from these modes to the other modes and the interventions that are inbuilt into these bundles. Okay. So, this is another additional point to make when you throw these proposed interventions to bureaucrats and politicians to give them a more quantitative understanding in monetary terms, how much different mode users will gain and who will lose. Okay. Yeah. So, this was the small part that I left out in the mitigation. Any questions on this? Okay. Okay. Now, let us talk about adaptation. Why we have to talk about adaptation? Why this is important? Simply because when we talk about climate change, due to the historical consumption patterns, especially in rich countries, there is a clear understanding that some amount of damage, some amount of irreversible consequences of climate change are already happening, okay, and they are unavoidable. So, while we focus on mitigating our greenhouse gas emissions and thereby mitigate our climate change impact today and in future, at the same time we also need to prepare ourselves better or adapt ourselves better to those possible negative consequences of climate change due to that level of irreversibility that we already have to some extent in the climate change impact. Damages that have been done are now difficult to reverse. So, there would be certain consequences. The unfortunate and ironical part is that the impact of these negative consequences of climate change are much more severe in this part of the world, in developing economies, in not so developed world, where the system is less resilient and we are also not economically or financially strong to bring that level of resiliency. One is of course a lack of understanding, scientific understanding of what level of impact these would have in our context, and other is what level of interventions, what kind of interventions one can do to make our system more resilient. So, the ironical part is, while these irreversibilities or climate change impacts have happened because of the consumption patterns historically in rich countries, but the brunt of that is being faced more severely in developing world. Okay. That is why there is so much of focus today on resiliency, building more resilient system, building more resilient cities. Today, when you see urban planning and transport planning, we are simply not accounting anything of resiliency in our plans. That concept still has not sinked in into the regular concept of urban planning and transport planning. So, such kind of studies also are required to impress upon this point, that we need to imbibe that in our plans also as we do it in future. Okay, it should not become an afterthought. Earlier also I was mentioning that our way of responding to disasters is more reactive at the moment rather than proactive. Yeah, we tend to focus more on what can be done once the disaster happens and how quickly can be done, rather than also thinking what can be done to prevent the negative consequences of those disasters. Okay. So, there is an interesting case study and something we have not seen in literature, this kind of evaluation framework to evaluate adaptation policies. We have a paper in this International Journal of Disaster Risk Reduction in last stage of review. Hopefully, it will get published and we will be able to share that paper also. So, as I was telling, in this project, we took urban flooding as one possible consequence of climate change in urban areas. And taking that as a case, what can be done or what kind of strategies can be done, how can we evaluate them to see the impact, to make the transportation system more resilient. Okay. Now, these images are all across the country presently. Many of you who are coming from your respective places are worried about what is happening there. So, the severity or seriousness of this issue is, I do not think I need to impress much upon all of us, that this has become like a annual phenomena in our cities, where you see these kind of images quite often, and these images are all from Bangalore in last few years. Every time there is some heavy rain. Now, what could be the causal factors? When we try to start listing, of course, climate change remains one of the issues, these heavy rainfall events and so on, and how they have become frequent, from Mumbai to Chennai to Kashmir to Uttarakhand to every places that we see today, Kerala. Unsustainable, insensitive development. I was during tea breaks I was discussing with some of you that the urban planning or land use planning in India today is literally done by the builder mafia in connivance with the corporation engineers or development authority engineers. They are the ones who essentially decides what land use and urban planning. This is the blunt reality, unfortunately. Whatever theories we establish or concepts we establish remains on one side. So, in that process you then forget everything else. You then forget what could be the consequences of that kind of land use development on the city's ability to face these kind of disasters. Poor sewage disposal, this always remains a challenge. Inadequate drainage network, solid waste dumping in these drainage channels, and because of all these things, reduced capacity of the drainage paths as well as reduced capacity of existing lakes, and increased imperviousness in the landscape. You keep building roads, you keep having built up area, you make the surface as that much impervious also. You do not allow water to go into the ground. You know, in 2005, when the flood happened in Mumbai, I'm sure some of you might remember 2005 saw the most extreme flooding situation in Mumbai. I was working in MMRDA that time, and that was the only time I saw, you know, Mumbai is always said to be, you know, 24/7, you know, and the city never stops. But that was the time when I saw that city actually stopped. Yeah. There were many areas, many roads and localities where the waterlogging was very high. The two main, you know, arterial expressway, Western Express Highway and Eastern Express Highway, were you know, quite heavily flooded, and the water didn't reside. It started in evening, went on for next few days, and it was a working day. So most of the people who were in their workplace had to remain there, or if they dared to start, they got stuck somewhere in the night. And there were a lot of, every individual, every person in Mumbai had some horror story to tell. I had to stay and spend my night in the MMRD office, slept on the office table whole night. Likewise, you know, others. Fortunately, the office canteen had some raw food left out, so they prepared some, you know, dinner for us, and we could at least, you know, survive. And but next day the water didn't reside. But then what to do? You know, and there were no communication channels. I was not able to speak to my family. Fortunately, they were at home, and they were on 4th floor. My quarter was on 4th floor, so at least. But we were not able to talk to each other because the telephone lines, mobile phone lines, everything was gone. So we and my three of my colleagues, all of us were residing in the same quarters when we were neighbors. So we decided, okay, let's walk and let's see what happens. So we walked from my office in Bandra Kurla complex to our quarters in Andheri West near Juhu, almost about 8 kilometers of distance. It took us some hours. Of course, we are walking, and that too through water. Yeah, in many places we had to go through water up to this much in many places. And it was such a equality that day by God, that whether it is Maruti 800 or a high-end Mercedes, everything was on the road, completely submerged. Yeah. So God doesn't do any kind of inequality. So the burden was quite visible on everybody. Okay. So that was one my own experience of how you expose the weakness, the weak resiliency of the city when these kind of extreme events happen. Some people who started little early, as they saw that rain has started and it's getting flood, some of them got stuck on the way. I remember, my colleague's wife, she used to work in CST and used to, stay in New Bombay and travel every day by suburban trains. Now their train got stuck somewhere on the way and remained stuck whole night. Water entered into the compartments, and she had to stand on the seat whole night and spend the whole night like that. So that's how it is, and I'm sure today when the flooding is happening in many parts of the country, many people would have these kind of stories. So the point is, why not we do something proactive rather than just simply focusing on reaction. Yeah. Now, when this kind of flooding happens, what happens to the transport system? Now we have to understand what happens to the transport system. You may have increased vehicle kilometers traveled because maybe some roads are blocked, some roads are partially blocked, speeds have reduced. So the routes that you typically take, you cannot take in a flooding situation, so you need to take a detour or so on. So in general, the vehicle kilometers traveled in the city would increase. Also would increase is the vehicle minutes traveled, the number of hours or time that you are traveling, because the traffic has become slow. The road is partly covered with water, so the traffic has to move slowly. In some cases the links are out of the network because it is not motorable anymore, and so on. So, you also spend extra time traveling. Yeah, this could be one consequences. Other is cancellation of trips, and we hear this many times when we have these stories from different cities, that some areas got flooded so much that water didn't reside for next few days, and people couldn't come out of their homes. And that is the time when Ola, Uber come up with their innovative ideas and start sending their boats, Ola boats and Uber boats. Yeah, we have seen this in Chennai, we have seen this in Bangalore also. In last few years also, there have been some localities where the water levels have gone so high that they are unable to make trips which are made on a regular normal working day. They don't happen. So, this is like cancellation of trips. So, neither people are able to go out, nor people are able to reach those localities. So, that can happen. And as I said, increased travel time or speed reduction, deterioration of road infrastructure, that is also possible consequence. So, the objective of this work was to evaluate the business as usual scenario when a flooding happens. So, we have a normal working day, a normal business as usual, and you have normal working day with flooding, business as usual, means without doing any interventions. Okay. So, you have a flooding scenario, you have a no flooding scenario and business as usual, where you are not bringing any intervention, and evaluate what is the impact. Overlay the flood maps and do a vulnerability analysis of the road network as well as locations, and then develop adaptation strategies for base year, and then forecasting to 2030, 2050, and see how much of vulnerability you are able to reduce and how much more resiliency you can bring into your system. So, this is the general workflow of how we have done this work. First you have the loaded network with the traffic flows happening in a normal working day. That helps us understand what are the links being used, to what extent they are being used. We then use flood maps of the city as a input. Using that and overlaying it on the transport network, you then identify the vulnerable links and the vulnerable areas, okay, and study their characteristics with respect to the drainage capacity, type of road, locality, and so on and so forth, and identify those vulnerable links, and based on that information formulate your adaptation policies and use a evaluation framework similar to what we have talked in the mitigation part, and estimate the impact and finalize the adaptation bundles. Now, so of course, I am a transportation engineer, I am not a water resource specialist, so we have to collaborate. This is where the value of collaboration comes. I cannot solve this whole research issue and research question on my own. So, we collaborated with TERI in New Delhi, who were our partner in the project. They did the flood modeling for whole Bangalore metropolitan region, and created the flood maps using the DM maps and the digital elevation maps of Bangalore. They took this event as one of the extreme rainfall event, which occurred on 2015, 3rd November 2015. It was a rain for 4 hours 10 minutes, a total rainfall of 266 mm, and which has a return period of about 100 years. Okay. This is not very extreme, because now Bangalore also has been seeing these kind of closer to these kind of rainfall levels quite occasionally every year. So this was taken as the base scenario to develop the flood maps. Digital elevation. 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 It basically helps us get the contour of the whole area, so that you then understand, how is the slope and complete this thing. That helps us understand that if there is a given amount of rainfall, how and where the pockets of water will come, which areas would get submerged, to what extent, and so on. So, what we did was we overlaid this flood map onto the transport network of Bengaluru, and also on the land use layer that we had in GIS. Now, what we see here is the road network with flood level. So, what we could identify was that on each road, what would be the level of flooding on each road in the city. Okay. So, for example, we took out these sample sections to tell how much would be the flooding. So, for example, ISRO road would have about 0.42 meter of flooding, Banerghatta road would have 1.8 meter, Cord road would have 0.6 meter, Sarjapur road would have 0.5 meter. From the model. Of course, we have tried our best to validate these data as much as possible from whatever secondary sources. Whenever there is rain, we have tried to follow how much of flooding levels have been reported in different parts, and they are not very off the mark as what we have estimated here. And this is how the share of flood depth is for the whole network. This pie chart told the different flooding levels, how much of links have that level of flooding. So, this is a useful input information that we have. We also then looked at some research work that connects the level of flooding on each road to the percentage speed reduction on those roads. Due to constraints of time and resources, we couldn't do our own primary research to get these correlation between the flood depths and travel speed, but we will do so in future as and when we have the opportunity. So, what we did was, one was links which carry a flood depth above 0.5 meter were like taken out of the network, with the clear idea that they are not motorable. You can't. So, they are like dysfunctional links, they do not exist in the network. That is how you incorporate their impact in the model. Yeah. And there were 7 zones in which the trips were cancelled. There were 7 zones where the flooding levels were that much high that there were cancellation of trips. Now, what we did was, this is the business as usual flooding scenario in base year 2030 and 2050. Okay. This is how the network would tend to get congested as you see the flooding situation. Okay. Now, here we have 2 bars. This blue one is BAU no flooding, a normal working day without any weather event. Okay. And this orange bar is BAU flooding, a normal working day with flooding. Okay. But both business as usual, no interventions done. Okay. What I am trying to see is how the vehicle kilometers traveled is changing. So, what I see is base year 2030, 2050, you see an increase in the vehicle kilometers traveled. Okay. It's just by using the flood level information, factoring the travel time and speeds on each link based on the level of flooding, okay, and then reassigning the OD flows onto the network based on the flooding level. So, if the flooding level is beyond 0.5, that link is out of the network. That is how it is. So, that is how you calculate the vehicle kilometers traveled in a flooding situation. So, we did not incorporate the impact on mode choice into this. Okay. That is something that we can do as a further research and see how this may impact the mode choice. Okay. But these things we need to understand and discuss how rationally we can bring these things. For example, if it is a normal working day and say you have spent your part of the day in work and this rainfall starts happening in the evening or night, okay, as you are leaving for home. Same like what happened in Mumbai. Your mode choices would not change immediately or would not change suddenly, because you have used certain mode in the morning, in the daytime for your commute trips, which you regularly use. You may still try to use those. So, what I am trying to say is, yes, there could be impact on mode choice, but this has to be thought very carefully as to how do you bring that in your modeling. So far, we did not account for the mode choice change. Yeah. So, as I said, there could be these effects that may happen. We have also of course accounted for those zones which get completely flooded, and so the origin destination trips happening from those zones are also eliminated. So, that way we have accounted for to a good extent. Okay. So, you see about 4 to 6% increase in the vehicle kilometers traveled in a flooding scenario. When you look at the amount of time traveled and how that differs and changes in a no flooding scenario and flooding scenario, roughly anywhere between 14% to 23% impact you are actually seeing in the increase in the travel time. Okay. Average trip length, we see about for private vehicles anywhere between 19 to 27% increase in the average trip length and 15 to 23% increase in the average trip length of public transport due to the flooding situation. Likewise, the average daily vehicle speed anywhere between 26 to 44% based on different years. That is the level of reduction that you are seeing in the speed. So, what this means is that there is still a weak resiliency in the network, and the flooding situation is definitely impacting a normal life, okay, a normal working day life, because your distances that you are traveling are increasing, travel time that you are spending are increasing, speeds are getting reduced and so on. Okay. So, clearly this means that we need to bring some interventions if we want to do some proactive measures and see how much we can make the system more resiliency. So, the concept of resiliency here is that if in spite of a heavy rainfall situation, I can still allow a normal day to day functioning to happen. Okay. That trips still happen, people still travel from their given origin to destination. If I can achieve that, that makes the transport system more resilient, that we have still made it weatherproof. Okay. It is not impacting our day to day life. That is the whole idea when we are trying to evaluate the impact of the proposed interventions, to see how much closer we can bring ourselves back to a normal life situation. Now, many of these strategies may also do a function of mitigation also, because if you are able to bring back and reduce your vehicle kilometers traveled from a BAU flooding situation, you are also reducing your gasoline consumption as well as exhaust emissions. So, some of these strategies can also go hand in hand with what we are doing with mitigation. So, again we followed that stakeholder consultation, Delphi approach, etc., to look at what kind of interventions that one can think about in terms of adaptation measures, adaptation policies, and we created these 3 bundles. Okay, bundle 1, bundle 2, bundle 3. Again we looked into literature We looked at different case studies as to what kind of interventions people have researched or tried in different parts of the world, okay, and try to arrive at these bundles, which we then evaluated using our evaluation framework. The first bundle has a mix of land use and infrastructure interventions. For example, it is talking about replacement of impermeable road surface with permeable material in those vulnerable areas where the flooding levels are high, so that you can reduce the flood depth to some extent. Slum relocation and rehabilitation, because again I think earlier I was saying that there is a equity angle also to it. Most of the time these low lying areas or areas where flooding is higher are the ones where you have low income households, slums, because those are the ones which others do not touch, and that is where these slum settlements happen. So, there is an inequitable impact on them. So, if we relocate and rehabilitate them to less vulnerable areas, how this may pan out. Third strategy was providing proper drainage facilities at vulnerable area, which would then have an impact on reducing the flood depth on those roads. Fourth is construction of redundant infrastructure. Now, especially in those zones, those areas where the areas are cut off due to high levels of flooding and there are cancellation of trips. So, for example, there could be a situation where some localities are connected by a single road or a single link. In that case, if we have a redundancy of infrastructure, maybe that may help to still have that area remain connected. Okay. So, construction of redundant infrastructure. Second bundle is more of land use and information, or more, mainly traffic management, rerouting people during flooding, restricting development in low lying areas, and slum relocation and rehabilitation. Third bundle is infrastructure plus this information, provide proper drainage and rerouting people during flooding. Now, the point is, how do I evaluate these things? So, we really had to use a lot of our thought process to see how do I incorporate these strategies into model, how do I make my model sensitive to these strategies, so that then I can understand the impact of them onto the transportation system. Okay. So, this kind of methodology we have not really come across in the literature. So, it was interesting work, we also enjoyed doing it. So, for example, this policy bundle 1, we could feed, for example, this relocation rehabilitation as a input into the future productions and attractions, because by changing the location of populations or pockets, you are essentially changing the trip productions and attractions. So, that is one way we can incorporate. Likewise, for example, replacement of impermeable road surface with permeable ones, construction of drainage facilities and redundant infrastructure. This would have impact on the network level parameters. It would have impact on the travel speeds, how they are changing, and accordingly the travel time. So, you can feed that into your route assignment as well as partly into your mode choice models. Okay. So, that is how we try to account for their impact of each of these policy bundle into how they would impact one or the other stages of the travel demand modeling. Okay. Now, again as I was discussing in the mitigation part also, that we need to have an implementation plan. I am trying to evaluate this for Bangalore. Okay. So, for each of these we created an implementation plan. Okay. First is the impermeable road surface with permeable material. Okay. What this will do is, it would reduce the runoff, reduce splash and spray, avoid reflections from the surface of the pavement, and would essentially also reduce the flood depth. So, we identified the vulnerable links, replace the surface with permeable material, thereby it reduces the flood depth, okay, and which would then have impact on the travel speed on those links. So, then we feed that information into our route choice and route assignment models to see how the new speeds are estimated and the flows are remodeled. So, these were all the roads. I have specifically listed all the names of the roads, and they are all marked on this map where this intervention was feeded into our simulation model. Okay. And the model variables and the travel variables that may get impacted would be cancellation, changes in cancellation of trips, vehicle hours traveled, kilometers traveled, and even average trip length. Slum relocation and rehabilitation. So, we identified the slums in the low lying areas where the flood depths are higher, okay, and we relocated to other areas which are not vulnerable to urban floods within the same zone or nearby zones, and thereby changed our productions and attractions and reflected that in the OD matrix, and have those new OD matrix and remodel the flows. So, we had the complete slum data and slum map of whole Bangalore from the concerned agencies. We used that to do this analysis, and then came out with all these list of slums which we relocated and rehabilitated. They are all spread across on this map. Construction of redundant infrastructure. So, we looked at roads, road links with no redundancy, and especially where there is a higher level of flooding. And so, new road links were added to those roads that are completely cutting off access to certain zones due to flooding. And again, this was fed into the network level parameters to model its impact. And we could identify these 10 locations where we added these redundant infrastructure in the city. Okay. Rerouting people in case of flooding, likewise, restricting development in low lying areas or vulnerable areas. These were the locations where we made the implementation plan. Providing proper drainage facilities at vulnerable areas. So, the idea was that wherever which roads in the flood depths are higher, and if the drainage capacity is not adequate, if by adding more drainage capacity you can, and connecting those drainages to the nearby lakes, you can essentially bring down the flood depth on those roads. So, these were the locations or roads where we implemented this policy and fed into our network. Now, what are the impacts and effects of all this? So, again we implemented each bundle together. Whatever policies or measures are there in each bundle, we implemented it together. So, this is about VKT in 2030, 2050. Now, there are 4 bars here. One is BAU no flooding, BAU flooding, and these bundle 1, bundle 2, bundle 3. Okay. And this is for 2050. What we are trying to at least do is bring the bars closer to this, because this is what is a normal life on a normal working day without flooding. Okay. As close as we can bring it to this, we are trying to make our transport system more resilient. So, you would see the bundle 1 gets us maximum benefit, about 4% reduction in the VKT from a BAU flooding scenario, bringing it closer to what we can achieve on a normal working day. And this is how it is in 2050. Then the vehicle travel speeds, again we get maximum benefits in bundle 1, bringing it closer to what we have in a no flooding situation. So, the average speeds are, we are able to increase anywhere between 21% to 45% due to the implementation. Likewise, the average trip length for private vehicles 2030 and 2050, public vehicles 2030, 2050. Again, we gain maximum gains or reduction in the average trip length in the B1 scenario, about 11%, anywhere between 10 to 13%. Vehicle hours traveled, the amount of travel time 2030 and 2050, you can see about 8 to 9% reduction in the total time that you are spending on the network, bringing it more closer to what we have in the no flooding situation. And cancel trips, you can literally bring the number of cancelled trips to 0, which is you can still allow every activity to happen in the city and doesn't let any part of the city getting cut off. Okay. So, this is what is proactiveness, okay. Reducing the possible negative impacts of these kind of weather events, and then whatever is left out, focus on your reaction, quick reaction, okay. Not leaving everything to doing reaction rather than proactive steps. Okay. So, what we have showcased in this work is a good evaluation framework to quantitatively assess the impact of these kind of adaptation measures and showcase how a city can become more resilient. Now, we can use this kind of methodology in every other city that we face these kind of problems and see how we can build strategies for making the transport system more resilient, allow a normal day to day activities to still happen even in a flooding situation. Good. Questions on this? For example, that adding redundant links, but one can always do more. I mean, it's all based on the vulnerability analysis and what interventions you think would improve the or reduce the vulnerability. Yeah, of course, because we estimated uh, see, we estimated the flood depths on each and every road based on that extreme rainfall event. So, we have a complete understanding on every road, and it's not that on a single link. Now, a single link between two sections may be a kilometer long stretch. So, it does not mean that you have same flooding level. So, all that has been, so certain part of that road may be flooded to this much water level, and certain part to, all that also has been taken into account. Any other question on this? Yeah, so as I said, uh, in a way it gets incorporated uh, in estimating the flood levels, and wherever the flood levels are higher than certain values, we have either omitted the trips being made from those uh, um, zones, or we have um, estimated that there will not be any trips happening from those zones. So, that way it gets accounted for to a good extent, whether people are able to take their vehicles out from certain areas or not. Yeah. The idea is to have those new links added, which are above the levels of the flood levels that you are estimating, so that they are usable. So, in that case it could be a elevated a road section. Now, you can also feed these new links as say pedestrian paths, elevated pedestrian paths, or you can also add these new links as a additional metro line or something else. It purely depends on our imagination. You can feed them and keep trying these scenarios and see how this improves upon. What we have done for this paper is we have added those new road links and reassign the traffic, assuming that these links, their level is above the flood levels in those areas. Yeah. Correct, correct. So that was there in, as one of the strategy, that you have, permeable road surface rather than impermeable road surface. So that also would help reduce the flood depths. Any other question on this? I mean, as I said, once you have this kind of modeling or evaluation framework, you can then think about any such possible, measures that you feel could be useful in reducing the vulnerability, and try them out and see how they improves the network, how it brings, your day to day commuting closer to what it is on a normal working day without any weather event. So that's the beauty of these, simulation models, that it helps us play uh, with, whatever we can think about, without having to, wait for a disasters to happen, do something, and then, see on the ground how this is improving and so on. So you create a virtual image of what would actually happen, and see its impact and give a better decision support to the authorities. This kind of work is very useful for NDMA to understand what they can do as part of, or to the, BBMP, the corporation, the and development authority, to then imbibe these kinds of measure also in their planning documents when they create master plan documents or comprehensive mobility plan, or they need to keep this resiliency aspect also in mind. Yeah, in I no, I don't think any city has done any adaptation measures so far. It's all, focused on how quick you can react after the disaster happens. It's still the same. I mean, you go to, NDMA office and talk to them. We were doing another piece of work where we were trying to see the, impact of a earthquake on a urban road network, and what kind of post disaster or post earthquake traffic management one can think about. So for that, one of my research scholar was in Delhi collecting some data, and she went to NDMA to meet the officials and get some data. Her case study was Delhi, because it's in high seismic zone. Now when you talk to them, they would have information or geocoding of where the schools are, or where are the identified locations and hospitals where you can have quick, evacuation to take people, or to hospitals in case of injured and so on. But how will you reach there? There is no information that they have. There is no knowledge whether a given road would remain available, or how much of traffic on that day it would be. See, the OD matrix or the OD pattern would completely change after an earthquake happens. People are not going to their office and, school, or coming back and doing those regular activities. Your OD pattern is completely changing. You have now people, rescue teams moving to different areas. You have people being evacuated to different areas. You have people being taken to hospitals. So your whole OD changes. So if you don't have any clue about that, and then accordingly what network would remain available and to what extent, if you don't have that knowledge, then what kind of emergency response you would plan and do. So NDMA has no clue about it for any kind of disaster. So these kind of methodologies we need to evolve, have more case studies to bring us this point, and help them develop their response plans also much better, and also build in the concept of adaptability and resiliency in the planning of cities. Any other question on this? Okay, I am optimizing my time well. So let me go to my buy one get one option. Okay. This was a recent paper we presented in the World Conference on Transport Research that happened in IIT Bombay. Where we have tried doing some study about understanding young women's perception of safety in public buses. And we could lay hands on two data sets, one from Ahmedabad, another from Bangalore. Although the data sets are not very big, but they are still good enough for at least a good initial study or a direction of understanding about these factors. Of course, this has been an issue. I can't emphasize much. All of us understand how critical and important this issue is, and also in terms of how women commuters would embrace sustainable mode options more. I mean, today if you want to promote public transport, you also need to make them safer for every sections of the society. So, let us see, and of course, I had co-authors Professor Meghna and Dr. Manoj, and also a student from CEPT University who was doing this as part of her thesis and also was interning in my lab. This is how the flow of the presentation is. So, these are some of the images that Professor Meghna was also showing in her presentation. The general level of difficulty or ease women commuters would face in using public buses. Yeah. And there are various things that comes from these images. Maybe let us try to understand and extract what do we understand from in terms of women perceptions about the ease of use of public transport or safety aspect. What do you see in these pictures? Tell us. Sorry. What do you see in these pictures? Difficulty in boarding. For example, this figure you see. Yeah. It's also connected to the traditional dress that women have to wear on a day-to-day activity. See, many times women are supposed to wear these dresses even at workplaces as part of their dress code, or there are many colleges, institutions, offices that specify that women should dress up in certain ways and come. Now, there are of course issues when you don't have level boardings and alighting. Yeah. Women also have multiple roles in the societal setup that we still have. For example, here you have a woman carrying child. How easy and good you can make the commute for women while also taking care of that role. Yeah. The crowding levels inside and the associated issues with that. Correct. You also need to carry probably a bigger purse than what men has to carry. We can carry a small purse in the pocket, but you need to carry a lot of other things, and need to have a bigger bag. We also have to keep in mind that the female workforce participation rate have been increasing. There are more and more females coming in workforce today. Okay. And as they come in workforce, of course, their travel needs are also need to be taken care. Our transport interventions, our transport planning, policy, operational level interventions, all that need to understand those needs of both gender commuters and how they plan and provide the system. And as more and more female comes in workforce, the challenges increase, both for the system designers and also for those women to be more multitasking and play multiple roles. And that then also leads to more and more demand for safe public transport. Okay. Their ability to trip chain, we have been talking about activity based models, how much of how much of trip chaining they can do with say use of public transport, and the level of public transport that you are affording to them then also decides what level of accessibility they are able to enjoy. Now, a lot of studies have happened, but they have been mostly in the space of NGOs or think tanks, who do more perceptional and qualitative studies, bring out some numbers and statistics. But we have very hardly seen a more scientific, more quantitative understanding of this issue, and looking at safety as one of the service parameters of public transport. So, evaluating service gap of public transport with respect to different dimensions, but also safety. Okay. So, it is important to study the young woman's perception of safety while commuting, and young women, of course, because also there is a large, our Prime Minister keeps saying that we are a young country, we have a large workforce in the young age. Yeah. So, their perception is important, and they are the ones who are joining the workforce. Now, we looked at literature, a lot of things and have been studied. For example, this World Bank study, women tend to make complex travel patterns and more number of trips than men. This was one of their conclusion. Another study concluded that they have inferior access to both private and public means of transport with respect to certain case studies that might have been taken. Much more fearful of crime than men, lesser physical ability to defend themselves, greater propensity to transfer past experiences and memories of victimization to present. Women feel unsafe and are fearful of becoming a victim of crime while traveling in buses due to lack of trust in other people. There are some studies on Chennai also, where 66% women respondents stated that they have been harassed while commuting. There are more studies, transit passengers' fear and concerns about safety influence their travel decisions, because if you have a safety perception, it would also influence your travel decisions, your choice of mode, the choice of time that you travel, choice of place that you travel, and things like that. In UK, 1 in 8 women surveyed said that they felt so unsafe on public transport that they avoided using it. In this study, they found that people avoid specific bus stops, use them only during daytime, or do not use transit at all if they fear being harassed or victimized. So, there are at least some research evidences on what we have seen from case studies in other parts of the world. So, based on this background and understanding, the objective of this study was to investigate the safety perception of young female who travel in public buses in rapidly urbanizing cities, and namely Ahmedabad and Bangalore, where we had the data set, to find and understand factors affecting young women's perception of safety in public buses. Now, these two cities, both cities have a number of educational institutes when you look at Ahmedabad and Bangalore, and thus supports a large student population ideal to investigate young women's perception. The cities are also well known for their public bus services. Ahmedabad is known for their BRTS interventions, BMTC is known to be a profit making undertaking with large fleet and large fleet size, and so on and so forth. So, it was a good comparison we could see. Ahmedabad is about 6 million, Bangalore 10 million. The time that we did study, of course, these numbers might have increased. We did a simple random sampling and face to face survey, and primarily we targeted universities and institutes, because that is how because this was an academic study, we did not had a funded project, and the questionnaire had questions related to first the personal socio-demographic and other factors, statements intended to evaluate each respondent's perception of safety in public buses related to their satisfaction, and statements regarding infrastructure, safety at bus stops and security measures. Uh, this was the data set we had, 192 sets from Ahmedabad that were finally used after cleaning and missing data analysis, and 422 from Bangalore. That's the the social demographic of the sample that we had. In Ahmedabad set we had 68% graduates and 31% postgraduate. In Bangalore it was a bit higher on the postgraduate side. 22% in Ahmedabad were daily travelers using public buses, 20% sometimes. In Bangalore 31% sometimes. Feeling safe, unsafe, in Bangalore, in Ahmedabad a higher percentage had a overall feeling of safety while traveling, but in Bangalore it was 62%, only 37% had a perception of unsafe travel. And this is how the travel within different types of buses or services within the sample. So 39% were using the normal Ahmedabad municipal transport service, or 42% were using BRTS, and in Bangalore 59% were using Volvo. And now this is not 100%, because some of them were using more than one types of buses. So that's how we have got the now these are some basic empirical results. When we ask them to rate their agreement to some of these statements, which is like at bus stop, their perception of safety at bus stop, while traveling inside the bus, while boarding and alighting, and also in Bangalore. Okay. So when you look at Ahmedabad, this is the percentage of people who agree with these statements that they are safer, but there is also a level of neutral or a disagreement with these statements. The important thing to see here is you still have a percentage of people who never feel safe at these locations, whether it is at bus stop or while traveling inside bus, while boarding and alighting. In Bangalore, for example, you had a pretty higher percentage of people feeling unsafe while boarding and alighting. So the notion of safety perception of public buses has to be beyond just traveling and experience in the buses. It's also about their boarding and alighting experience, and it's also about their experience at the bus stop. Now the interesting fact for Bangalore is that the bus stops are not within the jurisdiction of the bus operator. BMTC has no control on bus stops. It is BBMP who has complete control on where the bus stops will be and how you will construct them, what facilities you will provide them. They may liaise with BMTC, but primarily it is in the hands of BBMP. It is not within the jurisdiction of BMTC. And it is so ironical and weird, I would say, because bus stops form a important and integral part of the overall service of buses, public transport. But if that is not within the hands of operator to improve, then you are simply not able to control an important aspect of your overall service or level of service that you are offering to your commuters. It's not so in every city, and I think in Ahmedabad it's not so, as for my best of understanding, but in Bangalore it is like this. And BBMP, the municipal corporation, would always have, why they want to keep this in control? Any idea? Advertisement. The revenue coming from advertisements. So their focus of where the bus stop location should be is basically in terms of how visible the advertisements would be, and nothing else. Now it's getting reflected here also. Now this is feeling of safety and percentage of people who faced issues while traveling in bus. respondents who feel safe while traveling in buses, and respondents who feel unsafe while traveling in buses. So, these are the percentage, and that too for each city we have issues faced by respondents themselves or issues faced by respondents' friends or relatives. Okay. So, you see all these percentage, giving us a clear picture. It seems to be more in case of Bangalore, comparatively less in case of Ahmedabad. And the important thing to keep in mind is that experience that one gains you would easily pass, quickly pass that perception to other people also through word of mouth, isn't it? So, it has a peer effect also. Reference group's experience could change one's own perception of safety to some extent, especially when the reference group is of known people, and this may result in decline of the bus ridership, which is not something that we are trying to achieve when we say improve and bring more sustainable transport. So, it is kind of becoming counterproductive in that sense also. 47% of the respondents who have experienced an issue in the past continue to travel via buses. Now, this is an interesting fact. Why they continue to use buses? Now, the reasons could be either they are captive riders, they do not have choice for alternative modes. Now, it could be because of the income effect, or it could be because of the restricted car, ownership, vehicle ownership in the household. Maybe there is only one vehicle, which is now being used by the head of the household, which is men. So, the women then do not have access to that vehicle. Other could be they are financially constrained and continue to use the bus services, compromising their safety. So, now what we did was, we then first did a factor analysis to arrive at common factors from these statements. In case of Bangalore, we had these three factors that came out from the factor analysis: safety feeling at bus stops, anxiety while traveling in the bus, and bus stop facilities. And these were the statements that were found grouping in these factors. Likewise, for Ahmedabad, we could derive 4 relevant factors: safety feeling at bus stop, trust with other passengers, and anxiety while traveling in bus and bus stop facilities. So, we could get another relevant factor in case of Ahmedabad data. Then we fit a model to understand how these are impacting the safety perception, and it was like a binary a model where either you feel safe or unsafe, and how different factors which are derived from the factor analysis are influencing these variables. So, for example, the educational qualification has a positive estimate, okay, which means that if you are more qualified, your perception of safety would be higher. If you travel frequently, maybe the experience helps you or understand you, and have a better and higher perception of safety. Interestingly, in case of Ahmedabad, those who are using BRTS are finding it more unsafe as compared to the normal bus services. In case of Bangalore, again age has a positive impact, which means that older people who are using probably are finding the perception of safety higher. Educational qualification had a negative effect here, interestingly in this case, as more qualified people are finding it higher perception of unsafe travel. The interesting point here is the safety at bus stop has a positive leading to a positive perception of the overall safety of public buses. So, the what you do at the bus stops is giving a perception of the overall journey. So, if the women are feeling unsafe at the bus stops, their perception of public buses is also unsafe. So, that is why I was trying to make this point, that it is so ironical, the bus operator in Bangalore does not have handhold on the bus stops, okay, and what kind of interventions need to be done at the bus stop. So, do not just focus on the travel, the in-vehicle travel, but you also need to focus on boarding and alighting and how safe you make it, and also how safe they feel at the bus stops. So, if we try to summarize what these results convey us, in case of Ahmedabad, the travel frequency on public buses and educational qualifications were found to have a significant significant variables associated with perception of safety. If the respondents are traveling more frequently, then they perceive their travel to be safer. Young women with higher level of education are more likely to perceive buses as safe mode of travel than those with lesser educational qualification. Those who preferred BRT bus are more likely to perceive buses as unsafe mode of travel than those who choose AMT buses than normal buses. In case of Bangalore, the age of respondents and safety feeling at bus stops were found to be a significant parameter of perception of safety in public buses. The positive parameter estimate indicates those who are older are more likely to perceive buses safer than those who are younger. If women perceive bus stops to be safe, then they were more likely to perceive the public buses safer. So, how do we make use of these results on some or the other way? Safer bus stops, one needs to focus on them. Level boarding and alighting, proper seating at bus stops, and also provisions for young mothers, elderly women, CCTVs, patrolling, helplines, all those things could help. And more trustworthy stuff. Often I see these advertisements also on television, where they talk about if more women come in workforce, if you see more women everywhere, whether that's driving cab or being bus conductor or being bus driver, that would also have improvement in improving the trust. Physical infrastructure, the level boarding at bus stops, very important, also to take care of the dresses that women wear. Destination display and audio systems to reduce uncertainty about the present and next destination. Overloading of buses should be avoided and prohibited to ensure safety and ease of movement while entering, standing and exiting the buses. Buses should be closed whenever the bus is in motion, so that you have a better notion of safety, and of course, obeying traffic rules and so on. So, this is one example of how we can try to address this issue through a more quantitative research. There are very less case studies with this kind of evaluation or approach that we have. We need more and more case studies to bring on some general interventions that we can do in cities, or these guidelines or interventions needs to be more city specific. We can't just assume or analyze something from one city and then try to apply it in different. And while comparing Ahmedabad and Bangalore results, we could see that there are differences in how the perception of safety is. Okay. Good. Any questions on this? Pretty much on time. Sometimes it's interesting. We have this institute NIAS close to IISc, National Institute of Advanced Studies. They generally have a yearly one kind of training course, a refresher course, or whatever they call, for women achievers and scientists in different walks of life, especially in government. It's organized by DST and hosted by NIAS. So they'll get women officers, say some women officer serving in ministries or in ISRO or these kind of organizations, and they would have these sessions on sustainability aspects in urban development or in general walk of life. So they will always keep one session on sustainable transport, and last year they invited me. This year also they've invited me. It's going to happen in September. So last year when I went to present, um, and it was all women colleagues, all these officers and scientists, and I was making this presentation, and it was very interesting experience. I did focus and present while talking about general aspects of sustainable transport, but also focused about some of these gender issues. But it's very interesting, sometimes women tend to uh, neglect or not agree to some of these gender issues that they come from these kind of. For example, I was talking about some of the gender issues with cycling, and how, say, for example, wearing traditional dresses is difficult. Now, there were many, many scientists in the, some of them, who didn't agree that, this is a problem, that no, this is absolutely fine, I can also cycle and so on. See, there is also so much of socio-economic diversity within our country, that maybe certain sections of, women may not understand what's happening with other sections of women. So it was very interesting experience, trying to discuss and argue with them as to what they feel, and sometimes how we see, and things coming out of research. So I don't know how much a woman sitting here would have agreed with what was there here, but if there are any points, I would be happy to discuss. Uh-huh. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I think there's so much of this we can, scientifically study and help. And these are all things that go beyond a traditional, engineering or planning domain, where you need to then, work and collaborate with people with other disciplines. So you can see, the kind of authors that we had in the papers. It brings that different perspective and domain knowledge to study these kind of problems. They are important to do. Well, the data set that we had, of course, it comes out in a big way. Yeah, yeah, because we had a lot of statements. We derive factors from that. But if you go into the statements, there are many of these statements which are directly asking. Oh, it's very clear. Yeah, I mean, it's prevalent in many cities. I mean, this is certainly a reality. Yeah. Ah, yeah, of course. Correct, correct, correct. No, see, see, for example, if I link this, with the other study that we did, which Professor Meghna presented about the car ownership propensity among youths, what we could clearly see from the study that women are more likely as compared to men of buying a car in the immediate future as quickly as they are in position, and they are connected to these things. They are connected to these things.
What I find discriminatory is that a man cannot sit in a lady's designated seat, but a lady can sit in any seat. Okay? But this is where I want to get a sense, why is this so prevalent? Perhaps it's got to do with this unwanted touching, unwanted, so are there connections? But otherwise I would find it from a standpoint of legality, I think it's discrimination.
But see, it's also more to do with the social setup, the social thinking, mindset. You're dealing with social demographic. The income level of people, income status. There's so much of complexity in understanding this issue in our context. Uh,
Also in many cases, it's not only with the women and the men. When the old age people, if they're sitting in the women's seat also, nobody will actually tell them to please get up, this is reserved exclusion for women. Despite the tension
yeah,
of
yeah.
gender, because of the age factor, and even many other cases, for the
With
physical
courteousness of some kind towards the
have to stay
senior.
there.
The other thing is, how do you make public transport an attractive option for women who are in workforce, because you still have your multiple responsibilities. You may have to go to work, but then you also need to take care of kid, drop them to the daycare. I mean, every time I have a secretary in my lab, she has to go and put her child in the daycare. There's so much of multiple roles that you still have to, yeah. So trip chaining. Now, how do I make it happen with public transport? When,
Also, many cases, especially traveling in the evening or post
yeah,
evening, you see many men who are drunk or with alcohol
yeah,
entering into the bus, and it definitely is not very safe for women to go sit behind. That's the
yeah.
reason there is a particular section reserved for the women, and also you can see that they don't usually go. This is one of the things that I have experienced or have seen.
I always, in my family, it's really the reverse. It's interesting because I'm a complete non-alcoholic. Will always be a non-alcoholic. And as soon as my two girls came of age in terms of being able to drink, they started consuming alcohol. And now my wife is drinking alcohol, so I Brandon and Conference. But men drinking and really it's much
And
more
being
prevalent.
unstable.
It's much more prevalent.
There's
Yeah.
also an issue with last minute connectivity. Like you get out of the bus stop, then you might need to take perhaps an auto rickshaw to reach your home. And women don't feel safe catching an auto rickshaw to go. So they would rather have their own vehicle which they can drive
Yes.
out.
So that's what, you're forcing them to use an unsustainable mode as quickly as they can because of these service gaps.
But
In,
sir, actually in some cities like Mumbai, it is not I think gender specific because women are traveling a lot of distances with suburban vehicles and they are using it up to the public transportation.
I know it's also because a lot of them are captive riders. See, I've lived in Mumbai. I have also worked in MMRDA. We have done studies on the transport system there. So the context is pretty different. You have large section of captive riders. Uh,
And most of the people there try to use public transport rather than using their personal vehicles.
I know. So we have been.
That is
So
To drive it together.
correct. So in our lab we have tried also focusing on these gender aspects in transport in various ways. Here we have talked about women safety, but we have also done gender aspects in walking and cycling. There was another PPT that I had opened, but now time is not there, so I will not take it up. Where we have focused on gender aspects of cycling, walking, traffic injuries, and road safety, and gender issues in that. In fact, this September I will be in UC Irvine. There is this conference by the TRB committee on women issues in transport, where I'm going to present a paper on the road safety and traffic injuries aspects, gender aspects in that. So, a lot of these things we are doing. The whole point of making this presentation was to make you, familiar with how these modeling and statistical modeling methods can be used to even look at these societal issues more scientifically. That is the point I am trying to make here. How do we bring in these qualitative data sets in understanding these issues and do a more rigorous statistical modeling to make sense out of it and bring more decision support. Yes, yeah.
The surveys are conducted at cost of
Well, there are various, so these are face-to-face interviews. My student and my main author, Professor Meghna, will know better how they have done it. We have basically helped with the statistical modeling. Good, then we'll break for lunch and come back at 2:15 for some interesting things. Thank you. I think you have all been a very, I'm sure, Chandra would agree. Yeah, they have been wonderful, audience to listen to our boring lectures. Thanks to all of you. You have beared us a lot.
Lots to do.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's go for lunch.